Okay. So the goals, there's 2 goals for this workshop, but you can stop me if you have any questions, or if you come to the end, or if you even have any personal ones at the end of this presentation, I'll make sure to try to address them. But what I want everybody in this class to come out with is, one of my key goals is to overcome the myth of what it means to run a nonprofit organization. So we're going to talk about the basic steps to starting a nonprofit corporation. And then I'm going to go into some things that you need to do to stay legally compliant and be fully functioning. And you'll see why this is important. And it's different from having a for-profit. So we're going to talk about the 9 steps the key steps that you have to take to start a nonprofit and to keep it running. But it's really important to talk about what is a nonprofit. And I think this is where a lot of people get mixed up. So a nonprofit is a type of corporation. I've heard LLC, and then you got corps, S corps, C corps, but you're basically a corporation. And what you're saying as a nonprofit, as a person who wants to start a nonprofit, you're saying that you're going to do something on behalf of society. That's the mission. And that's everything we're driven by. So I prefer to use mission-based organization over nonprofit. Because what happens is, when you set yourself up as a nonprofit corporation, you're telling society, I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, whatever you told the state and the IRS on behalf of society. And then what happens is, because we think that's wonderful, we allow you to be exempt from corporate taxes, corporate income taxes. That's why we call it nonprofit. So it's a misnomer not to think that you're not going to pay any taxes or it's free money and all that. You're basically saying that you're going to do something on behalf of society. And as a reward, we say, okay, we're going to exempt you. You can use that money that you would have paid for corporate taxes towards your mission. So the distinctions of being a nonprofit corporation is, there is no personal gain, supposedly, from running a nonprofit. You don't give dividends to your board. You're doing it for the public good. And every nonprofit has to have a board. You cannot be the founder and run it by yourself. Like Beyond Existing is an LLC. So it's my company. But I'm not governed by a board because I'm a for-profit. And I'm not incorporated, as a incorporation. I just have an LLC. So basically I'm a solo entrepreneur. But when you have a nonprofit, you have to have a board. So the way it's set up, we're doing this on behalf of the public. You have a board that governs it according to the society, the government, the IRS, and all the state officials. The board is the nonprofit. Then you have what we usually have as a manager. The manager can come from the board, or you can hire a person. That's typically the executive director. And then under this executive director manages everything. And this governance thing is a whole class. And then you have your staff and your volunteers. So when you say nonprofit, this is combining 2 meanings. First of all, you become incorporated through whatever state you're at. And each state has their own rules on incorporation. Each state has different fees. Like when somebody calls me to help them set up a nonprofit organization, Reva, I'm in Detroit, so I bring up Michigan a lot, but you have to go to your state. Like I found out in Arizona, you have to, once you go through the paperwork, you have to file it in a legal newspaper to say you're a corporation. So you have to follow the rules for each state, but the state gives you your nonprofit corporation status. So once you get that paperwork from the state, you are now legally a nonprofit corporation. To get the federal tax exemption, that's when you have to get the 501c3. Some people think you have to immediately run out and get a 501c3. You do not have to get the tax exemption to be a nonprofit corporation. However, to be exempt from federal corporate taxes and sometimes the state, because they all have reciprocity and all these other agreements or whatever, typically you have 2 years to get your 501c3 without the IRS asking a lot more questions than they would otherwise. Another thing too is if the intent is that you're going to go get your 501c3, so up to those 24 months that you have to get the file for the 501c3, you can get tax deductible donations because we know that you have the intent of getting your tax exemption, your 501c3 status. So does that make sense to everybody? Okay.
Yes. I have a quick question I should have asked on the previous slide. Where do you fit in that chain as far as the board? Where does the owner fit, the creator, so to speak?
That's up to you. You can either stay on the board or you can be an executive director, and executive directors are the managers and are the non-voting member of the board because you report to the board. So as the founder, that's up to you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So there are advantages. Why should we even bother starting a nonprofit? Because I can tell you, I've talked to a lot of people out of starting a nonprofit, but there are some advantages that people, you want to look into, if this is what you want to do. One of the key things I always tell people is you don't have to start a nonprofit to be nice. You can be a for-profit and be nice. So what a nonprofit corporation status gives you is limited liability, just like all the other corporations. Your liability is up to the assets of the corporation and not going after your personal liability. We'll talk about D&O insurance later. Here's one thing that people don't realize about nonprofits. We say all of your assets have to be in what we call perpetual existence. For instance, so you buy a car, you buy it using the assets in the name of the nonprofit. You decide we're not going to run this nonprofit anymore. You cannot take that car or the proceeds from selling that car and say, well, it's a wrap, and then take the money and put it in your personal account. You have to take those assets or the car and give it to another nonprofit. And then you have to report to the state and IRS because they're going to want to know what happened to those assets, because all assets have to be in a nonprofit for perpetuity. So those are the kind of things you got to think about. A lot of these rules are so you can't launder money or foul up the good nature of what a nonprofit is supposed to be. There's employee benefits like the 403B and other things that we can get running a nonprofit. And then most of all, you have formality and structure. The people that donate to you know that you're a corporation and that you're going to do what you said in your mission because you set yourself up as a nonprofit corporation. As far as the 501c3 tax exemption, you get federal and state income tax exemptions. You will have to check with your attorney or your accountant about local taxes. You get tax deductible donations. You're eligible for public funds. Most corporations will not donate to a nonprofit unless they have the 501c3 tax exemption, or most foundations as well. You're eligible for lower rates on postal and other services, and you can get estate tax benefits. That means somebody signing insurance over to you, or their estate tax, anything like that. But there are disadvantages. One thing is a proliferation, and I talk about it in this marketing class I teach. Not only in nonprofits are we competing against all the other people that start nonprofits, we're also competing against McDonald's and everybody else. Who do I give my, today I just spent $10 at Wendy's. Who do I give my $10 to? Do I give it to Wendy's or do I give it to your mission? So there's a lot of nonprofits out there. There's so many right now that the IRS is backlogged on getting these processed. So there's a lot of them out there. So that means we can have potential redundancy. One thing I say is before you go through all the paperwork, the cost and the time, make sure that's the need for the market that you think needs to have the need. I would go do your marketing just like if you're going to start a for-profit. Are there people in need? What pain points am I going to handle? Do I have to have a nonprofit to take care of that pain? Because again, you can have a for-profit and just be nice. So really look at that. A loss of control, because Reva asked me about the executive director. Again, you start a nonprofit, even though you're the founder, you came up with the concept, you did all the groundwork, your board can fire you. You don't have that control anymore. If you're on the board, they can vote you off. So you lose control starting a nonprofit. There's a lot of administration burden. And I don't want to belabor all the disadvantages, but I want people to understand this. We have to file paperwork because we're not paying income taxes and we're saying we're doing something on behalf of society. So the government is going to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing on behalf of society. So we have more paperwork. Plus a lot of it too, they want to protect the people that is giving us money. Oh yes, Reva?
You've used the term have a for-profit, but just be nice. What do you mean by that?
There's no, some people, I had a woman a long time ago, she came to me, she had a for-profit business where she provided rides, and she wanted to start a whole new nonprofit just to drive people on holidays when they were intoxicated, so they wouldn't get tickets or get in an accident. And so when I say that, I said, you can be nice and provide that, and that just could be a charitable thing that you do. You don't have to start a whole new nonprofit corporation to do that. So that's my way of saying you don't have to start a nonprofit corporation to do nice things for society. You could just do it as your for-profit business and you don't charge for it. Okay. As a 501c3, a nonprofit corporation, you know, we're limited. We cannot do a lot of lobbying on behalf of people or issues. That's a whole class in itself. So our political activity is restricted. Again, our assets are going to be dedicated to the nonprofit for perpetuity. And probably one part of being a nonprofit is that most of our money has to come from the public. So that means we're going to have to ask for money. So general considerations of what you want to think of is there a need up for it, for your mission? Do you have the core support? Again, you are in business. You're going to have money to run that business concern. Do you have consistent funding? Again, is it duplicative? Is somebody out there down the street doing the same thing you're doing? And is forming a nonprofit the best approach? So again, like any business, these are the things you got to look at. Excuse me. So here's the environment that we're dealing with right now. There's a lot of nonprofits out there, and there's more every year. One thing, again, I'm from Detroit. I remember in the 2008 recession, we had a huge issue because the auto industry was manufacturers were asking the government for a bailout. So, you know, they couldn't give money to the nonprofits that they had been carrying for years. And so a lot of nonprofits, especially the big ones, were devastated in their budget. So what we're going through now is you may have been living off of this bank for money for years, and then through a corporate merger, they're no longer there. Donor fatigue. I mean, right now, COVID has changed how I can give money, and I had to tell people I can't, support you at this time and trying to get stuff back up. Foundation fads. I won't call this a fad, but what happened with a lot of foundations when COVID arrived, they shift their priorities to COVID issues. So if you thought you was going to get a grant from them, they shift their focus. Sometimes they shift their focus and they say, this is our theme, and you've been living off of that money for years. So these kind of things that can impact you. And another thing is a lot of them will not fund newer organizations. So that's something you have to think about. So in terms of sustainability, for you to survive, you have to have a mission or focus that's viewed by the stakeholders as having value and that you're going to last a long time. So that's what I want you to do before you start the paperwork and we talk about all that. Really look at, is your mission, because that's everything you do is your mission. Everything you do is going to emanate from that mission. Is it something that has value and a long time frame? And then here's the rules on the be considered a charitable organization, a 501c3 organization. Notice it's C3, there's a C4, C5, C6. But to be a 501c3 charitable public organization, you have to be organized and operated for charitable, scientific. It has to include either testing for public safety, literary or educational purposes, sports, and prevention to the cruelty of animals or children. These are the only functions or missions that the IRS will accept for tax exemption under the 501c3. And actually the state will probably not incorporate you unless you fall under these parameters. So here's some examples of what is considered from most states and the IRS as charitable. Of course, religion, but that's different. They're ecclesiastical organizations. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't see my thing. Okay, here we go. Okay, relief for the poor, distressed, or underprivileged, public buildings, defense of human and civil rights. Any of these things is what they would consider charitable. Until a couple, I think it was 2005, the NFL used to be a nonprofit organization. Blue Cross Blue Shield is a nonprofit organization. So you went through all of that information, you thought about it, and you said, yes, I'm ready to be a start a nonprofit corporation. So this is what you need to think when you're preparing. Again, if you keep hearing me, I keep talking about mission, mission, mission. The thing that you tell your state and that you tell the IRS is what you're going to be doing. That is the only activity for you that is going to be considered tax exempt and under your incorporations. That's why it's really important, because everything you do is supposed to be driven from that mission. So you want a clear mission and you want a vision. So your mission is saying what you're going to do, and your vision is going to be what the world is like when you do it. How you're going to go about doing, impacting that mission that you have. So ways we do it is with planning. So you need to have a strategic plan and a business plan, just like with any business, including your budget. Now, typically incorporation papers, they don't really deal with the budget, but when you want to have to fill it out for the tax exemption, depending on which one you file, the IRS is going to ask you for a current year and the next 2-year budget. Another thing you need to do is start convening your board and your supporters, but particularly your board. And now you want to start talking about a strong executive director. That doesn't mean the executive director is going to get paid, but you need somebody who's going to manage the day-to-day operations. So you need to find that person if it's not yourself. So the thing at the state level, you have to file, when you file your incorporations, every state asks for what they call articles of incorporation. Now in Michigan, they have a pretty good template that you can use. And I've noticed that other states do too. What they typically, they'll tell you what they want in those incorporation papers and what's their laws. And each state is different. But some basic characteristics are, you're gonna have to name who's the board. You don't have to file incorporation in the state you live in, but whatever state you're in, you have to have what you call an agent or somebody that lives in that state, because they'll get all the paperwork and everything, and they have to file all the paperwork on behalf of that state. They'll charge you a fee. In Michigan, it's only, I think it's like $20, and it's pretty seamless. Some states, want different information, but they're going to want to know how you're going to run. Are you going to be directorship or membership? Who's going to be the board people? And they'll just ask you for different information. So it's important to look at what the state is asking for and providing with that information. And I think in Michigan too, they usually, when I set up nonprofits, always ask for at least 3 people. Even if your state, in Michigan, you have to have a minimum of 3 people on your board. Even if your state needs less, like Arizona only asks for 1 person, the IRS is gonna require you to have at least 3 people. So I always say get 3 people. So on your articles of incorporation, you have to have a name. Usually within the state, it has to be distinct. The IRS, when you're trying to file for your EIN, it will slow it down if there's a name that's slightly the same as somebody else in the country, but they won't reject it, but just know it'll take a little longer to process it. You have to have a mission. It's important that your mission is somewhat broad in scope. It benefits the public good, and is concise. So take time with writing the mission. Again, what you tell them is your mission is what is tax exempt. So don't think that you can just go in and do anything because now you're a nonprofit corporation. What's tax exemptable for you is what you wrote in your mission. Then they're going to ask for basics like, of course, non-stock. They may ask you about some simple assets and budgets. I know in Michigan, they don't ask that much about it, but it will come up for the IRS. And then they're going to ask, are you going to be running by directorship or membership? Some nonprofits have members, like if you have a film society and people pay memberships in, and then the membership votes for the board. If it's directorship, that means that the directors go out and find board members, nominate them, and vote them in. You have to have a location in your office. Again, you don't have to register in the state you live in, but whatever state you are, you have to have some office or agent within that state. They're going to want to know the incorporators. And if they, anything else, any other IRS restrictions or things like that, term limits and that kind of stuff, you don't have to, that can be in your bylaws. But up to number 5 is typically what they ask for. Then most important, because people roughshod over this, but your board of directors is very important. Sorry, I think I hit. Okay, the board of directors. think I put this in the wrong thing. So the pros and cons of incorporation, again, it facilitates tax exemption, generates revenue, and you got the perpetual existence until you're dissolved. And I have dissolved 2 nonprofits. The cons, there are filings every year, but just like I know in Michigan, all of us have to file a permit form. There's a permit you have to file with the nonprofit. Then you have to file a charitable solicitation paper with the Attorney General's office. With any other company, I don't like calling this con so much because you have to keep your record keeping. But in the nonprofit, some records are for public consumption. Somebody can come in your office and see certain records. You have to observe corporate formalities, no matter how small you are. And again, you can see perpetual existence can be a pro or it can be a con. Then get into the board of directors. You want to have your board of directors meet for the first meeting. And what happens is I give my clients their paperwork and I say, meet with your board, because everybody has to sign paperwork for the state typically. And a lot of people just get with their friends and they sign off real quick and no one really takes it seriously. But you want, your board is the nonprofit. If anything happened or even good things to happen, the board is the nonprofit, not the founder, the board, not the executive director, it's the board. So you really want to get some people, and when you're on a nonprofit board, you're supposed to be sold out for the mission, and that means you give your time, talent, and treasure to that organization. It means that you're sold out for that mission and you're going to do what it takes to keep that organization going. And that's actually your role. Again, remember, you're doing this in the interest of the corporation, society, and this is a class in itself because you have a duty, what we call care, loyalty, and obedience. So what I always advise is just don't grab your friends and your family. There are some places, especially now, that you can go, even on indeed.org, if you're seeking out board members, that may be a good way, because that means you got serious people who actually want to help you with the mission of the organization. So what the board does, they oversee everything. Your executive director and your staff and your volunteers shouldn't be doing anything unless the board allows it. The board does give you parameters as you grow, but it is really not, the executive director is just the chief manager that reports to the board and makes sure that they orchestrate everything that the board is asking. The board, again, is the organization to outside entities. They should be the chief advocates and evangelists, and then the chief funders and the fundraisers. They're the ones that got to keep the ship afloat. So you want to find people that have passion, interest, and commitment. And that's why I was saying too, you could go and put like on Indeed or LinkedIn. If you're seeking out a board person, you may be looking for a certain expertise. You may be looking for somebody who wants to, get some connections and resources, or provide your organization with some connections and resources. Especially nowadays, you want a diverse community, particularly if you're talking about working with a certain community. Have some of those people that you're serving on your board. And then again, including some of your customers. So the bylaws are the internal regulation and management. That's how long does a person stay on the board? What's everybody's role? All that is in there. This is another thing, I provide customers with, some template bylaws, and they just adopt them, and I don't even think they look at them. You should adopt them at your first meeting by the new board. But this is a good time to sit down, look at those bylaws. You may have a template that'll help you out, and I'm gonna provide that to all of you, like templates of all this stuff. but really make it your own. Because if something happened, like if you had to go in court or whatever, the court's going to look at your bylaws. And that's how a lot of decisions are going to be made. But your bylaws said this. And I've had organizations that I walk in and they'll say, you can use a telegram. When was the last time we used a telegram? But that was how long it's been since some people have updated their bylaws. You should look at them at least once a year. So the provisions on the bylaws would be your purpose, and that's your mission as stated in your articles of corporation, how many directors. Even though you need a minimum of 3, you want to have at least 5 people on your board, and you want it to be an odd number. You want to talk about the terms of your directors, and when you have your board meetings, and what consists of a board meeting. Nowadays, since we're in technology, one organization I know of, because of COVID, we didn't have it in our bylaws that we can meet online. So we had to retroactively vote to allow that all the decisions that were made for a year when we weren't able to meet face-to-face were put into order. Then we had to update the bylaws to allow online communication and online meetings to be, in fact, meetings. So that's the kind of stuff you have to have in your bylaws. Other things are your officers. You have to have a president, secretary, and a treasurer, but have a vice president because you need something just in case the vice president may not be able to fulfill all of their roles, or it's a good way to have somebody ready to take over leadership. But you have to have a secretary and you have to have a treasurer. And that's different from the staff treasurer and secretary. And then you have to establish what quorum is. And so these are different ways to have what quorum is. But again, that's up to you. But if you have 5 people, you should have it that 3 people are in attendance. Another thing you want to talk about your first meeting is name your board and elect your officers. So you can see that at first meeting is really important. Adopt your documents, approve what activities you're going to get involved with first. And then I'm just recommending use the minutes of a first meeting. And it's from a book called How to Form a Nonprofit Corporation. And I think this is part of the stuff that I'm going to be sending to you as well. But you just make sure that first meeting sets the groundwork, because again, those minutes, they're official. And if something goes awry or there's questions, you can either go back to your bylaws or your minutes, the board minutes, and then I'll tell the organization what the board intent was at that time. And a lot of people neglect to do these things, and it just creates a lot of issues. Are there any questions? I can't see anybody.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So at this point, you had your first meeting, you started your incorporation, you're now a nonprofit corporation. The second major step is to get your tax exemption status. I'm going to say this too. So you may be an organization so small that you don't think you need to get, federal tax exemption status. You can do what's called get a fiduciary. That's when you get another nonprofit and they act as your fiduciary. They're a 501c3, so they get the grant and they administer the money to you, because you may have like 1 or 2 big projects or something, but nothing where you want to file and get a 501c3. So that's another avenue you can be. You're still considered a nonprofit corporation, but you just don't have the tax exemption status. Now, most nonprofits, and the IRS is taking care of this as well too, they file for what we call the tax exemption status. And the form we use, and actually there's 2, and we don't even, and everything's done online now. at pay.gov. But you file first for your EIN number, your employee identification number. Do not ever pay for your EIN. It's completely free. And it takes maybe 15 minutes. It's like real time. You'll get your EIN number unless they have to do some checking and they'll tell you what you have to do. So that's how you have to do. But I've had people paying, and that's just those people that are scamming people. It's like you click on the first link, and that's usually a scam. If anybody's charging you for EIN, you don't have to do that. Now, the forms we use to get the file for the 501c3 tax exemption is Form 1023 or 1023-EZ. So what you do first is you set up an account on pay.gov. Now, here's the thing. If you're going to be like, I know of a nonprofit, I think they hold a parade every year. That's their big function. That's all they do. They're like a community person. If you know that your revenue is going to be less than $50,000 within 3 years, you can file what is called the 1023-EZ. That will cost you $275. But if you know you're going to be a full-blown nonprofit organization concern, so like you're running a health center, then you file what they call Form 1023. They switched over in about 2000, so all forms have to be filed online. And it's pretty easy. They let you go through each step. What I've done, I'm going to send you a copy of the instructions, and I think I have a dummy form of all the questions that they asked that I'll be sending you. But those are the forms that you use to file for the 1023. And here's the information about the fees. Now, I get a question all the time. It's like, what if you're at $51,000 or $50,001? I have looked, I have asked, and no one has told me what the loophole is. But most people know in general, like I said, if you're just going to be doing 1 or 2 big activities a year, you're going to just be giving out a scholarship, then it's going to be like the 1040-EZ. So that's how you figure that out. Again, these are the requirements. You have to have a function or a mission that falls under these parameters, and it has to be something that's being exclusively for the benefit of the public good. And it falls under these. If your activity or your mission falls under these, now if you're religious, such as in a church and ecclesiastical organization, because of the principle of separation of church and state, you do not have to file full 501c3. You're already tax exempt because you're an ecclesiastical organization.
So based on what I described, it sounds like I need for-profit, not nonprofit.
It depends on what you do. You're going to be working with children. You're going to be doing it, and it's going to be educational, right? And then you said health and wellness, so that falls under sports.
Honestly, I wouldn't say educational, because it's really just fun for them.
Yeah, but that's
I wouldn't want to be placed in a position where I got to prove that it's, in a category versus just make it for profit.
Yeah, but still sound charitable because you're helping kids in the community. I didn't have a problem with what you were doing. Yeah,
okay.
I still think it falls under it. You wouldn't, that can still be written up and you'll still be telling the truth.
Okay.
A lot of people, yeah, it's like enrichment, So yeah, I think you'll be fine. Now, what the IRS is going to be doing, and this is when you prove it anyway, because if they feel like it's not, they'll tell you, you don't fall under it because of X, Y, and Z. So they say you must be
Yeah.
operate.
Do you need not a business plan, but something like a business plan that you describe all your mission and all that?
Oh, yeah. That's what the
So,
1023 is. So usually, like if I provide, and I'll send you a copy of my checklist, because those questions is what I usually need when I'm filling out this form for other people. But you do need a business plan, because I have to understand what you're doing. And that's what the IRS is doing. They're asking you, what are you doing? Because they're seeing if it's exempt. And because your company has to be ran for the exempt purpose.
So, okay, who's paying us to run this nonprofit organization?
You're raising the money. You're doing it.
I'm raising it. And then I get exempted. Okay.
You're not exempted. You can pay yourself. We get paid in a nonprofit. Your business, like any business, it's like, how do I get paid? I go out and sell my services. What you're doing is you're going to be raising money for the mission. And part of that cost is going to be administrative, like you have to eat. So you can pay yourself.
The difference between nonprofit and profit is you gain money and then you pay taxes. The nonprofit is you raise money, but they help you with the exemption. You try not to.
Well, what happens? You raise money, or you earn a grant. So yeah, you raise the money, but you don't have to pay corporate taxes on any reserves that you have, extra money.
And both are audited, right? Is it auditing, or is it like providing evidence that you're paying for this and that?
Yeah, you have to do everything like a business. And what we say is, because most people, if they want to get a grant, you should have your records should be audited by independent auditor to make sure you're doing it correctly. You run everything like a business. It's just certain rules and stuff, and it's more public because you're a nonprofit. The only, and here's, we came to this no profit environment. I'm going to say this. It's not that you go in a nonprofit and you go broke. Like I said, Blue Cross Blue Shield is a nonprofit organization. All this means is that I can't take the money and split it up among the board. We don't get private gain from pulling off this mission. That doesn't mean we can't take, and that's not, I'm talking about the staff. Like if you're the executive director, you can get a reasonable salary. You don't go broke just because you're running a nonprofit. It takes the same amount of tact and intelligence as it does to run a for-profit, even more, because you have to keep raising money all the time and you're doing stuff on behalf of the public. So it means that
ongoing.
Yeah, you can't buy a car. Yeah, and it's ongoing. You can't buy a car from the, in the nonprofit's name and use it for your private use. That's private benefit. But you can buy a car if you're going to visit clients. But do know when you sell a car, either the proceeds have to go back to the organization, and if you close, it has to go to another nonprofit. You got to be careful about your politics. And it's really, that's really important. So these are the things that the IRS is looking for. But don't think that you go broke because you have to be in a nonprofit. Okay. Again, it's not required for churches. And if you're part of another organization and you're one of their chapters, like if you're a Red Cross chapter, you don't have to file for your own 501c3. So the form, like Fadi was asking, what does this form ask for? Yes, you need a business plan, and this is why. They're going to ask you about your activities and your operation information. Like any business, or if you're writing up a business plan, you haven't done it yet, but you want to get those programs that you want to serve. How many people you want to serve. You got to have a clue about how you think you want to the activity flows, because we're going to be writing a narrative. You want to talk about your personal and business relationships. A lot of people that start a nonprofit, you have another job, but the government wants to make sure that you're just not doing this so you can get some tax activities done tax-free. But they want to know that you have the expertise. How are you going to be getting the money that you're going to be raised? What relationships that you have? So they want to know that information. If there's anything technical, I have one lady who's a developer, and she's going to be developing land using green stuff. I can't think of the name for it. So we had to write up a thing about that. And then your financial information, particularly if you're filing out the Form 1023, if you're a new going concern, they're going to ask for the current year and the next 2 years. So you still have to have a reasonable thought about how much money you're going to be pulling in and what your different expenses are going to be. It doesn't have to be ironclad. It may not come to fruition, but you have a plan. So typically, I stay conservative, and then the second year I raise it by 20%, and then I go and raise it like another 20 to 35% based on the company and how much money they may have. Some of you may not have a dime right now, but you know that you'll have 1,000 in cash. That's fine. They're not looking at it. They just want to see that you're going to be a going concern.
I have a question about your board members. Do you have them pay a donation as well, or is that up to us?
I do, but it's up to you. Everybody, if you're on the board, one of the first questions I ask when somebody asks me to be on the board is how much is my financial obligation? And what I recommend as a consultant, that a board should be either donating or responsible for a certain amount of money a year. And it can be token, because like you may have somebody for your community and they can't afford it, but they can raise the money, or give them the opportunity, like the galas coming, have them sell a certain amount of tickets. But there should be some financial requirement for every board member, because you don't have any money.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts from the board.
Okay.
Yeah. So these are the kind of things they're going to ask. And because somebody mentioned a scholarship, I did a 1023 for a scholarship. They're going to ask you how much you plan to give. So if you're going to be giving scholarships, have a plan for those scholarships, who it goes to. If you're working, one question they ask on a 1023 is, are you only going to be helping certain people? And you have to be able to justify that. But the biggest thing is have your mission and have something foundational, a foundational narrative of what you're going to be doing. Because those are the type questions. They're not hard questions, but they do make you think about what are you going to be doing, because they want to see that you're legitimate. So truthfully, most applications are accepted. And one of the cool things I can say about the IRS, you can pick up the phone and you can call them and you can ask them questions. So they will send, if they don't accept it the first time, you just make the correction, and thank God they're not the type that's you're trying to figure what they just say, we can't accept it. They'll tell you why. You can fix it, and they'll tell you by what date to send it back. You send it back. Right now, the turnaround, they're behind, I think they're behind like 2 months. So it may take a while to get some information back. But the key thing is, and that's why I was saying, make sure you answer and address their questions. Because if you can do it right the first time, that you don't have to send it back and go back into the queue. You just do it. And again, everything's online. So what I've been doing now is I take it and type it all out on Microsoft Word and cut and paste it into pay.gov. Because they have some, I'm trying to think, I think so though. I think they have some Word cutoffs and sometimes you have to cut it down, but you want to be very solid in what you're saying and make sure you look at the question and address the question. And so at this point, so now you're a nonprofit corporation, you got your tax exemption, everything's golden. But because we're doing this on behalf of society, there's some ongoing things you have to do every year. One of those is what we call charitable trust, the solicitation. You have to file, every state has somebody, some office that you have to file. If you're raising money, you have to file with the state. Here's the thing with, and I'm still doing some study on this. Every state has a solicitation place that you have to file if you are raising money in their state. The big issue is nowadays, a lot of us do online fundraising, and I have no clue where the money can come from. I can get money from Alaska if somebody likes my pitch. So I'm still trying to figure out, do I have to run over to Alaska now and file, charitable solicitation papers? But in the Michigan, you file every year. I think it's like more than $8,000, and you can go on every year and they'll ask you how much you file. And then based on that cutoff, you don't have to file. So if you get the errant one from Alaska, you'll probably be okay. But what I recommend too is, so for instance, you have an aunt in Florida and she raises a lot of money for you, and you know that, I would take the time to find out who's the Florida office in Florida and see if you have to file. Just don't ignore it. Definitely file for the state you're in. But if you have a secondary state and you get a lot of money from there, I would just go ahead and find out how much it costs to file. In Michigan, it's free. I think in New York, they charge. So you have to find out by state what you have to do. Another thing is if you do lobbying, and this is a whole different trick bag, but if you're doing what they say, if you're doing direct lobbying spending and it exceeds $1,675 or $425, you have to register. In Michigan, it's with the Department of State. Again, when we say tax exempt, we typically talking about federal income taxes. So I will look into to see if you're exempt from, in Michigan, you're exempt from state income taxes, but you still have to pay the payroll taxes. That has closed down more nonprofits than I can think about. For some reason, we think all taxes. You still have to pay your payroll taxes. You may still have to pay your property taxes. If you have an event out not in your state, you may not be exempt from their sales tax. If you sell things like t-shirts and it's a big going concern, you may have to pay taxes on that. So you want to get with an attorney or an accountant. Don't just think because I'm a nonprofit, I don't have to pay any taxes. We're only exempting you from federal income tax. Everybody else, you really need to check. Typically, state taxes are exempt, but don't assume. And then you have what we call nonprofit postage rates. You get a discount, but it's not free. And then, so again, other things you want to consider. You're in business now. So not only do you want to probably pay yourself, unless you're going to be volunteering for a while, you want to get insurances. Especially if you're working with children and all that, make sure you're covered with all that. Financial audits. Make sure your financial records are aligned with what typical general accounting practices. That's why I say you probably want to get a bookkeeper and an accountant that understands finances, unless you're good with that. But here's the thing too, I have a business school background. I'm avoiding I don't do all those. I understand it, but it's not my expertise, so I don't do it. So you might want to talk about that. And employment administration is huge. A lot of nonprofits, if you have a staff person, they cannot volunteer for you. So for instance, you're having an annual 5K. They can't volunteer on that Saturday to work. They have to be paid if they're at that function. So you have to understand those things. So these are the different things you have to think about as a nonprofit. So as a recap, what we talked about is what is a nonprofit, why you want to do it, the things you have to do in preparation of it, what's needed on the articles of incorporation, considerations for your board of directors, your bylaws, what it means to, and how do you file for a tax exempt status, all the different registrations and the ongoing things you're going to need to operate a sustainable and compliant nonprofit organization. So I'm going to stop sharing. So do I have any questions? I know I threw a lot out at you. That's why I gave us so much time. But we don't have to, well, we're going to be here the whole time. I'm going to start recording.